You're listening to episode number 56 of the UpRev Ninja podcast, and this is your host, Tom Hudson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the UpRev Ninja podcast. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us. This show is produced each week with the single intent of discovering the tips, tricks, hacks, and lessons learned from our guests that has catapulted them into living the best version of themselves. Join your host, Tom Hudson, as he continues his search for the best methods to uprev his life. Now, let's dive into the show.
Today's guest is Darrell Darnell, the owner of Pro Podcast Solutions, which began in 2008. In 2013, it became clear that he needed to part ways and leave the corporate job he held for over 18 years. Darrell took the big leap to become an entrepreneur and created Pro Podcast Solutions. Pro Podcast Solutions now serves podcasters across all genres with production, voiceovers, custom artwork, show notes, publishing. Hey, welcome to the UpRev Ninja podcast. Today I've got Darrell Darnell with me. How you doing today, Darrell?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
It's pretty cool talking to someone that's got the same setup as I do. Like you've got the mic flag, the microphone, you've got the sound dampening materials in the background.
That's right. Geeks are us. Apparently arrived at both of our houses and set us up with some cool stuff.
I thought you were going to say nice beard and nice glasses too. So
Well, I can't grow a beard. I don't have, a lot of people call this this is actually a goatee. What people call a goatee is actually a Van Dyke.
Right.
That has the mustache. I could grow a Van Dyke. It looks very pornish. Grow a decent goatee, and that's it. Like the rest of it looks like a 12-year-old boy trying to grow facial hair. So I applaud your full beardness.
Well, thank you. Well, Darrell, I'm excited to have you on. I mean, you've got a business that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and the story I know about you leaving the corporate world after a number of years and diving into the entrepreneurship. I'm excited to hear that. But before I give away everything in the kitchen sink, why don't you tell us like who you are and how you got to this point in life?
Yeah, well, thanks again. I'm Darrell Darnell, and I own Pro Podcast Solutions. Some of the listeners may know me from Golden Spiral Media, which is my podcast network where we talk about geeky and sci-fi television and movie projects. And so we've been doing that for 10 years. We actually started podcasting in 2008 with a podcast called The Fringe Podcast about the TV show Fringe, and we may talk more about that along the way. But Pro Podcast Solutions is my full-time job. I had a corporate job for almost 18 years, excuse me. And I left that in May of 2013, appropriately being the geek I am, my first full-time day as an entrepreneur was May the 4th, 2013, which is Star Wars Day, right?
Right,
So
totally.
it wasn't intentional, but it was a nice little happy accident.
That is awesome. That is awesome. So what made you make the jump?
Yeah, I can remember I was on vacation in probably somewhere early June, maybe even May of about 2012. And I was out kayaking with my pastor. And we got back to the dock, and I checked my messages on my phone, and I had an email or a text, I don't recall which, from my assistant. And she said, "Hey, I need you to call me when you get a chance. There's the scuttlebutt around the office is that one of the other departments is taking over a whole bunch of our responsibilities."
Wow.
That's not this kind of text you want to get while you're on vacation. Really not the kind of text you want to get any time.
Right.
But yeah, what had happened was I don't know if the timing was coincidental. I'm led to believe not. That while I was out of the office, I was the director of our e-commerce division, and one of the other directors went to the company's CEO and said some things about me and my team that were untrue, and in doing so began a process of undermining a lot of the work that we had been doing, my integrity and reputation within the company. And even after I was able to prove that his allegations were completely not based in truth, my reputation was never the same with the company's CEO, which is something to this day still baffles me. But
Yeah.
that was the day. That text message is that moment that sticks in my mind where I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is important. This is significant." And through that process, what happened the months and the weeks following that, meetings that I had, one-on-one meetings and meetings between me and that guy and the CEO, it became clear that I was not gonna be at that company for the next, 19 years, 18 years. I wasn't sure when, but my exit was impending, and it took a year and a half to make that happen.
So what was it, 4 years or so, you had already been podcasting up until the day you got that text. Had you ever thought you were going to jump ship and do this full time?
No, but I should have thought that
Yeah.
because podcasting was all that I wanted to do or think about. I can remember the day that podcasting changed my life. It was September 22nd, 2004. There was a flight from Sydney, Australia to Los Angeles, California, and mid-flight, it broke apart midair and crash landed on this weird island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. On board was a doctor, a criminal, a con man. You're laughing. You know where I'm going with
I
this.
do. I didn't at first, but I do now. Yeah.
It was the TV show Lost, and it just rocked my world. I had never been sucked into a TV show like I had when Lost premiered. And my wife and I were both really captivated by it. Me more than her, but we both were truly captivated by it. I started going online to forums and chat rooms and trying to just talk with anybody I could
Right.
about that show. And I found people at work that were interested in it. And during the second season of Lost, in one of those forums, somebody said, "Hey, there are podcasts about this show." So I went over to iTunes and I found Jay and Jack with the Lost podcast. I found the Transmission with Ryan and Jen Ozawa. There was the official Lost podcast with the executive producers Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse. And there was the weekly Lost podcast with Cliff and Stephanie Ravenscraft. And I really identified with them. And I started calling into their podcast and leaving my thoughts and theories. And they would play my thoughts. And I was like, it was like when you were a kid and you called into the radio station and they played your
Right.
voice and you felt like a rock star. But that's what got me hooked into podcasting, and that's what introduced me to J.J. Abrams. I didn't know J.J. from Alias or from Felicity,
Right.
and now he's a household name, but even then, like, people were still just discovering J.J. Abrams, and his next project was Fringe, and so, as I mentioned earlier, we started the Fringe podcast, and it blew up. We became pretty popular for that show, not to the level Lost was. Fringe was never that popular, but it was all I could ever think about. And even at work, I would like, do a little work, check on the podcast, do a little work, check on the podcast. So it should have come to me that, hey, maybe I can swing this podcasting thing into my full-time job. But it really took that moment where I was forced to really sit down and evaluate my future before I realized that I could make a go with this podcasting thing.
So, it's funny. I had no clue that's where Cliff Ravenscraft what he used to work on. Like, I know him from How to Get Your Podcast Started, like
Right.
that stuff. That's so funny. It's amazing what 14 years ago, right? That's kind of depressing at the same time. But hey, so tell me about this jump. And maybe it wasn't a jump because you had already been doing it for a number of years. But when you decided to leave the corporate world and to get into entrepreneurship, how was that for you and your family and those around you? I mean, you hear stories all the time. Some of the feedback people get, but how was it for you?
Well, it was tough. I mean, it wasn't a jump that I could make right away. I mean, I spent over a year miserable at my company, and I mentioned that the other guy answered to the CEO. That was so the way our company was structured. Some of us directors answered to the CEO, and some of us to the president. And I was one that answered to the president, which put me at a disadvantage in this particular situation because he got the ear of the CEO every week during one-on-one meetings. I got the ear of the CEO either on a special meeting that I had to call or once a month.
Right.
And so otherwise, I was meeting with the president every week, and he and I were lockstep. We had a mutual shared vision for where we were going with the e-commerce division of our company. But he left about a year before I did. And especially after he left, it was miserable. I had no one to really that shared my vision. No one above me shared my vision. And it was, I felt like the world was caving in and my heart was ripped out. People were commenting in the halls, Darrell, you don't smile anymore. My last evaluation was wretched, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
My new boss, who was a temporary fill-in after the CEO or the president left, they moved over this other guy who had already a full plate doing other things in our operations division, but he was kind of my temporary boss, and he was like, you've got to straighten up. This is just not good. Your attitude sucks. And he was
Right.
right. It was miserable trying to get out of there.
Yeah.
And my heart wasn't there. And I tried doing websites for people. And I love building my own websites. Pro Podcast Solutions
Yeah.
is a website that I built myself. And I think it looks pretty good. But building websites for other people was not something that I enjoyed. And again, the answer was obvious in front of my face, and I just wasn't seeing it. When we started the Fringe podcast, we were terrible. If you go back, all the episodes of the Fringe podcast are out there on iTunes. And the first season is terrible. Our audio quality sucks. But you'll see, if you don't give up,
Right.
you'll hear that point where we figured it out. And all that technical stuff and the equipment and the editing and all that was always me. And it got better to the point where people were going, okay, you figured something out. And, you've been doing this a long time now. Can you help me? I've got some problems. Can you advise me on this? Or I've got an issue with my RSS feed. Can you tackle that for me? And so people were coming to me, asking me for advice on their podcast. And finally it dawned on me, you know what? I could parlay that into a business.
Right.
I could do that. And so I started looking for and praying about opportunities to do podcast consulting and even editing for other people. And I finally got my big break through Cliff in November of 2012. He sent me an email one day that said, "Hey, I've got this friend named Stuart who's starting this podcast network, and it's about TV shows, but they're really short form, like 10 to 15 minutes. So it doesn't conflict with what you're doing with Golden Spiral Media. And I think you'd be a good host for his network." And I talked to Stuart, and he did offer me the ability to host on his network. But then I hit him back and said, "It looks to me like you need somebody to edit all of these podcasts. Can
Yeah.
I put my name in that hat?" And long story short, I got that job. And that was my first client that I was able to get for podcast post production editing. And then 6 months later, I was finally able to leave the corporate job.
Oh wow. That's pretty awesome. I mean, he's kind of seen as I don't like using the word legendary, but he's seen a lot. I know when I was looking into getting into podcasting, everyone's like, "Oh, you gotta check this guy out. Check out Cliff's work or whatever he's done out there." I don't recall the name of one of his old podcasts, but it was around getting a business started and everything. And I've only read some of his stuff. I never became a disciple, I guess some people would say, but yeah, no, it's pretty amazing, man. That's a awesome, and I wouldn't say it was a break either. I mean, obviously you had the connections, you had the rapport built up, and the skills. So, kudos to you. Um, so on this, as you're on this journey and you're going through this, did you ever have anything that kind of was staring at you in the face that you just had a hard time overcoming? Procrastination, fear, anything along those lines?
Well, I think fear is an enemy that knocks at all of our doors, and often too many times we let it in. Whether that's imposter syndrome, starting a podcast, or whatever, you're putting yourself out there as an authority and whatever it is, that's a fear. Leaving my corporate job was a fear. My wife
Yeah.
told me about a year after I left, maybe a year and a half, she said, "Yeah, I have to be honest with you, Darrell. I supported you 100% in your decision to leave the corporate job, but I wasn't sure if it was the right decision. I just knew that it was what you needed to do, and I'm with you all the way." But that was a fear that she had, and it was fearful. Um, kind of a big aha moment for me along the way. So I mentioned that TV Talk network.
Hmm.
They So Stewart was the guy that owned that network, and he had a certain amount of capital that he was willing to invest in that. He was trying to get advertisers, and he did a lot of things the right way. And I don't know why it never really took off. It was such a good product, but he reached a point where he had to make the decision to put more funding into it or just close it up. And he made the really difficult decision to close it up. And at that point, that was in like May of 2014. And some of the shows I think trickled off into June because he let every show kind of go through the end of that show's respective season.
Hmm.
And that meant that I lost because I was hosting some shows, sure, but the majority of my income was coming from producing and editing all those shows.
Okay.
And so when he closed up shop, I ended up losing. By that time, it represented about 70% of my income. At one time,
Ouch.
it represented about 90% of my income.
Oh,
Yeah, but it was good income. It was so much that I couldn't really go out there and get other clients because I didn't have the bandwidth to do that. But it also, man, if Stewart gets hit by a bus, I'm in trouble.
right.
So when TV Talk shut down and I had picked up, I think, 3 clients as it began to trickle down, I was able to pick up, I think, 3 new clients or maybe 4, but still I lost 70% of my income just like that, and we had built up our savings account. But I was trying to get other clients and they just weren't coming, and Cliff would sometimes send me a referral and it just wouldn't convert, and other
Mm,
people would send me a referral and it just wouldn't convert, and finally someone said to me during one of these calls where I'm trying to get new clients, she said, I go over to Golden Spiral Media and I see all this stuff about sci-fi stuff. And then I see this one page that says you edit podcasts for people. Are you doing this full time or is this a side gig for you? Because I'm really looking for somebody who's serious. And I was like, yeah, I'm serious about this. This is
yeah.
how I'm feeding my family. And what it brought out was there was a gaping miscommunication in my branding. You see, up to that point, I was doing everything through Golden Spiral Media. And that was at the advice of some marketing people that I had spoken with. And their advice was everybody knows Golden Spiral Media. Don't start a new brand,
Right.
piggyback on the brand that people already know. Well, that turned out to be bad advice. Good intentions, but bad advice.
Mm,
And so I split them apart. Golden Spiral Media is now just a podcast network. And I created a new brand that no one had ever heard of called Pro Podcast Solutions. And we launched that podcast or that brand in October of 2014. And I immediately started landing clients. I mean, immediately.
wow.
And by the end of the year, we had our first profitable month in over 6 months. And
Wow.
so that was a huge thing. I mean, it was like, gosh, why did I wait so long to break my branding apart and be intentional about my branding? But that was a really pivotal moment for sure.
Well, so I'm trying to keep this straight now. So you've got, Pro Podcast Solutions, you've got the other business, you're married, you dove into this. Um how did you keep everything standing and, healthy?
I don't know that we've done that. I mean,
Okay.
something gets sacrificed along the way, and
Yeah.
to be honest with you, Golden Spiral Media is my stepchild. But fortunately, we have a wonderful roster of hosts over there that are really self sufficient. They don't require a lot out of me, and they respect the fact that I'm trying to start a business and run a business and get a business up and running. And so even as the business has grown, they've still been very, very respectful of that. So it doesn't need a lot of work. There's a lot of things we'd like to do. We have a bigger vision than what we're doing with Golden Spiral Media, but that's the thing that really
Right.
had to make a decision. What gives, and Golden Spiral Media got that.
Okay.
Pulled the short straw.
Well, what
Um,
about I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
No.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what about launching this new business? Yeah, I think pre-interview I was telling you like I'm a productivity guy. That's my background, and that's what I really love. How do you keep everything running efficiently? What kind of tools, systems, anything like that you have that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, you asked me earlier about, fears and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest fears that I had was hiring a VA.
Hmm.
I've developed these systems. They work well for me. I know me. I trust me. These are all the battles that I think every solopreneur goes through.
Right.
But at some point, you either you're limited to what you can do, or you've got to bring in others. And I didn't have any problem bringing in other editors or writers or things like that, but it all hinges upon the systems and the ability to communicate with clients, get projects into the system, get them completed, and all that stuff. But that was gosh, wish I had done it sooner. People kept telling me, "You gotta get a VA, you gotta get a VA, you gotta get a VA." And the first VA I hired is someone that I know very well. She's actually one of our hosts. Her name is Karen on the Golden Spiral Media Network. She's got 2 or 3 of our podcasts that she hosts, so she knows podcasting backwards and forwards.
Right.
It made a lot of sense to bring her on board as our first VA, but even bringing our second VA, which I hired through a VA agency, that was nerve-wracking, but that was a great decision too, but it all hinges on our systems. Otherwise, nothing really happens. So we're actually in the middle of transitioning right now. We've typically used Dropbox in combination with Asana,
Hmm.
in combination with Slack. Those are kind of our 3 major team communication happens in Slack, and tasks get set up and completed through Asana, and then we share files back and forth with clients via Dropbox, and we communicate with them via email. We're transitioning to Basecamp, which kind of brings all those into one file management,
Hmm.
communication, tasks, and it kind of eliminates the need for email. So that's what we're currently using, and we've got, as I said, two project managers. They're VAs to me, but to our clients, they're project managers,
Yeah.
and they communicate with all of our team of audio editors, show notes writers, transcription, and all the other team members that we have.
Wow. Yeah. I had a VA 6 to 8 years ago. It's more for personal things. I was doing a ton of travel, and I would like, hey, I'm going to go to a city I've never been before, and I hired a VA only to put together, like, okay, so in Paris this week that you're here, here's where the farmers market is. Here's, she knew the type of music I liked. Here's the bands and artists that are playing. Here's the museums. Here's their hours. Just like she had put together a book basically for me. I should probably turn that into a business. That's been talked about multiple times with people, but I'm just now getting to the point where I think I need a VA for this because I'm starting to kind of get overwhelmed with some of the email. Like trying to keep up with everything. But yeah, so but I absolutely get that because the technical stuff for me is also it's easier for me to let go. But the non-technical stuff, I think, the voice, because that's your brand, that's your voice, that person's representing me or my business. That's a little bit more difficult. So I
Yeah.
would agree with you in regards to that can be you know bring up a lot of fear. Well, so that's great. Especially that you're transitioning to new tools, new platforms, and stuff like that. What about habits? What kind of habits do you have? Personal habits that you feel that contribute to your continual growth.
Well, then this is a habit I think, Tom, that I've had to really just be disciplined about. I don't know about you, but for me, when I go to bed at night, my phone is right there on my nightstand, which means when I wake up in the morning, it's the first thing I pick up.
Right.
And before I even get out of bed, I'm checking emails, or I'm checking communications from my team, and then that leads into Facebook, and then that leads into Twitter, and that, oh, here's a video, and 45 minutes later, I haven't even gotten out of bed yet. So
Right.
one of the things that I did, it's well over a year ago, was I made the decision that when I shut down for the night, my phone stays in my office.
Mm,
When the alarm goes off, I mean, I hit snooze, but then I get up and I make coffee. And while it takes about 5 minutes for the coffee to make, and I use that 5 minutes to make sure there are no fires to put out. So I'll check my email, check my team communication, and if there's time, I'll scroll through Facebook just to kind of see what my notifications are. And really, nothing more than that. I don't let it occupy any more of my time than the limit that the coffee pot gives me. When the coffee pot signals that it's done, I'm done.
yeah.
That's it. And so leaving my phone in my office, and so and then it's giving me that time. That's been really helpful for me. But even then, like before I leave my office my office is in my house. I have a room that's dedicated office in my house. But before I leave the office the night before, I look at my to-do list. I look at my tasks, and I number them. And I still love pencil and paper. I've got some software that does, to-do lists, but yep, there you go. You like to, I'll put down what my tasks are. I'll number them, and I'll do that the night before so that when I show up in my office, I now know what are my hot buttons. Did anything come in overnight, or does anyone need? Is there a fire to put out? If not, which typically there's not, what's my to-do list, and there's no distractions. But before I do any of that, I sit down and I reflect on scripture before I even do any of that. And I drink my coffee, I reflect on scripture, and then once that's done, now I can go right seamlessly into my tasks for the day. So, but it all kind of started when I decided to leave the phone
Yeah.
in the office and get it out of the bedroom, and that's been really really helpful for me.
Yeah, I've read so many studies. And you just said, 45 minutes. Yeah, it's a long time, and just so many studies about how it's impacting, relationships because, before you fall asleep, you and your partner in bed, not interacting with one another on your
Mhm.
phone for, yeah, it might be 5 minutes. It turns into 45 minutes, and then you wake
Yep.
up doing almost the same thing. And you know, people go to bars like or restaurants or whatever, and you can walk by and it's just like zombies, right? Like everyone's just looking at their phone,
Right.
and people forgot how to communicate to each other.
That's
So
right. We're losing that, and I'm a mild introvert by nature. Like
yeah,
I'm pretty outgoing once I know you, but the idea of talking to a stranger just terrifies me.
yeah,
Um, and that looking at that phone, that's familiar. That's my familiar friend,
right,
and I'm terrified to actually talk to a stranger. So I get that, but we've got to be, and I'm preaching to myself here. We have to be more intentional about putting that phone down
yeah,
and communicating face to face with people.
yeah. It's so easy, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like I can get a dopamine hit as soon as I pick my phone up, but
Yep.
to get that from my friend, they're gonna hold me a little bit more accountable, So, which is not a bad thing. Well,
Right.
Darrell, what about what is there something right now that you're currently working on trying to get to, the next level?
Yeah, we've put a pretty big goal in front of our company this year. So, Pro Podcast Solutions was created in, as I said, October of 2014. And then we saw about 30% growth that first year. And then that was 70% growth. And then last year was 100% growth year over year, which is great. I mean, we love those numbers. And so we doubled our business last year over the year before. And so at first I was like, you know what? I think we should probably expect a smaller number this year. We're not going to hit triple digit
Hmm,
growth this year. Let's maybe 50 or 70.
yeah,
And then my entrepreneurial friends were like, bull crap. You're not settling for 50 or 70. You're going to continue to push and go more than 100 because you're not going to settle. You're not going to that's the wrong mentality to have.
right,
So they were right. So we're really pushing to grow the company this year in a larger number than last year. And part of that is just trying to get the brand name out there on podcasts such as yours. We're also doing some other marketing things and creating new products and really trying to push and see what can we do. We've never really done any marketing except put up a booth at Podcast Movement and Podfest and talk to people, which has worked really well for us.
yeah,
So, but this first quarter, I guess we just ended the first quarter. We focused completely on systems, improving systems, which is why we migrated to Basecamp and doing some of those other things. But that's our big project is really making sure we've got the personnel right, making sure we've got the systems right. And now we've exited the first quarter and we're starting to put the accelerator down to see really how much can we grow this thing. And there's people out there that need our help. We want to help them, and just how much can we do?
okay, great. Well, what about I don't know, there's so much here. What do you wish people would ask you more often? Haha. Where did that come from?
Where did that come from? What do I wish people would ask me
Yeah.
more often?
I mean,
Um,
either from being a husband or you've got a couple of businesses that you've started and launched. Um, sometimes we do these interviews and we interact with people, and there's that kind of that question that no one ever asked, but I wish I could talk about it. You have anything like that?
I don't know that I have an answer for
That's
that.
okay. You will after the show. You'll be like emailing me about an hour from now, like,
I
ah,
know, right? It'll come
yeah,
to me. I'll wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go, Tom, I've got your answer.
that's
Where are
perfectly. I would love to know what it is. Um, well, what about books? What's been what couple? Do you have books that have been pretty influential in your life?
Well, the most recent one, I just finished it on a recent trip I took out to help a client out in San Diego. And I'm sorry, it was in Anaheim was the city I was
Okay.
going to. And it's The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. A lot of folks are
Oh yeah.
talking about it. Cliff has talked about it, in fact, but he's not the one that um, caused me to read it. One of my clients, her name is Rebecca Scott. Her podcast is The Encourager, and she's on a entrepreneurial path a couple of years ahead of me. And so I reached out to her and said, "Hey, I'm just going to share my raw numbers with you and what my goals are for this year. And I'd love because I edit her podcast and she's always talking about business growth and strategies, and
Right.
she loves this type of stuff. She said, "You need to read The Big Leap," and she was one of them that was like, "Don't you be satisfied with 50% to 70. I don't know where you're getting that number from. You need to go higher than 100." And so I read The Big Leap, and it really did help me realize I was the one that was putting that ceiling in it.
Right.
It was a false ceiling. And there was one chapter in particular where he talks about there's 4 hidden barriers that everybody puts on themselves. Everybody puts at least one of the 4 barriers. He says he's counseled with hundreds of people. No one has ever gone through his counseling without having had one of these barriers, if not multiple barriers. And for me, it was this barrier called the crime of outshining, which means I want to limit myself because there's someone else in my life that I don't want to outshine them to this extent. I'm okay with being right here and compared to the other person, but I don't want to outshine them. I don't want to make them look better. I don't want to make them seem superior or anything like that. And it really hit home with me that whether didn't really realize it until that point, but I had this fear of outshining, which was self-limiting myself.
Right.
Self-limiting myself. How do you like that?
Yeah. No,
Anyway, that book has really impacted me recently.
okay. Yeah, I think it's I this is a little different twist I think on that, but a lot of entrepreneurs they're afraid of success,
Mhm.
and I can imagine being afraid of success is one thing, but being afraid of outshining your neighbor, your best friend, or a loved one, I can't imagine like I want to say I don't have that fear. I'm competitive, but I can empathize what that would be like, and my heart already just kind of like, meh, like just kind of
Yeah,
almost starts crawling up to my throat. So yeah,
yeah.
I get that. Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what hit home for me. The others were being fundamentally flawed, which is that person who says, "I'm not good enough. I don't deserve this." And oftentimes they'll wreck their life. It's subconsciously, they don't do it intentionally.
Right.
And but it's because something in their brain is telling them they don't deserve this level of success or happiness or health that they're experiencing. And so they'll sabotage a relationship or they'll make a poor business decision or something like that. Disloyalty and abandonment is another one of those hidden barriers, and then I had to write these down because I just
Yeah.
keep them nearby. Believing that more success brings a bigger burden. I don't want to be more successful. I can't handle that pressure that comes along with that, or what have you. But that book has been really good for me.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. It sounds really familiar, but I don't think I'm looking at. I've got stacks of books around me over here, and I don't see it. Sounds really familiar, but yeah, I'll check it out. Thank you for that. Well,
Yeah.
so what do you think is the one thing that contributes to your success?
Well, you mentioned that relationship with Cliff earlier,
Yeah,
and I mean, it's always been for me surrounding myself with people who are wiser, who are more experienced, and are smarter than I am, and not being afraid to ask. I mentioned one of my clients. My attitude could have been, I can't ask business questions to one of my clients. That's inappropriate or, whatever. To me,
yeah,
it was not inappropriate at all. She's an entrepreneur. She loves helping people. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a people. So why wouldn't she want to help me?
right.
And And she did. But so, and I'm in a mastermind with some other entrepreneurs, but I've always tried to surround myself who are wiser, more experienced, smarter than I am. There's an expression: if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of my philosophy on that. I try to always be not the smartest guy in the room.
Great. Well, moving just to some of the wrap-up questions here, Darrell. What's a piece of parting guidance if someone out there is listening to this today and they're trying to figure out what that next step is in their life? Yeah, what kind of guidance would you give that person?
Yeah, I would say two things here. First, it's easy. I hope we all have dreams, what we want to do when we grow up, or what we want to be, or goals we want to achieve, and things like that. I hope everyone has got that future vision mentality. But there are two things to bear in mind. One is you only get there a step at a time, and you don't get there if you don't do anything. So instead, I see this in my kids, and so I'm hoping as adults we don't have this problem. This is something as a dad I've been really trying to help my kids with, and that is, what are you doing to become what you want to be? I want to be a whatever that is, fill in the blank. Okay, what are you doing to become that? Because you can't be that until you make an effort to become that. You don't just get it by sitting there. And right along with that is, what is the next step that you can do today to get you towards that goal? Because oftentimes it's like, oh, it's so hard. There's so many steps between now and then. I don't know what to do. And, so just simplify it. Don't worry about all that. Just identify the one thing or one thing. Maybe there's multiple things, but just pick one and do that. And then pick another. That was what happened with our podcast back in the day when we sucked and we sounded terrible. I would pick one thing that sucked about our podcast and fix that one thing, and then pick another one and fix that one thing. And before too long, people were going, hey, you know what? You're kind of good at this now.
Yeah.
Can you help me? So, yeah, just identify that one thing and do it, and then do the next thing. Don't get overwhelmed with all the things.
That's great. Yeah, and that's pre-show when I told you I have like a billion post-it notes around me. That's what I'm trying to do. I think I've got it prioritized, but that's what I'm doing next week. Gonna go through it. I'm like, all right, I know where my weak link is right now, and it's not to do anything with gadgets, which is good. So, but well, so what's for the people that don't read show notes, I always ask this that way, if they're driving down the highway, what's the single best way to find out more about you?
Well, so Pro Podcast Solutions is a full service podcast support company. We help people with audio editing, writing show notes, transcription. If you haven't launched yet and you don't even know where to start with equipment or getting artwork created, we handle all of that stuff. So we are a full service support company for podcasters. So we've got a special link for your listeners. It's propodcastsolutions.com/ninja. So if you go over to that, you'll see a way to contact me if you wanted to set up a discovery call. You'll find a link to our Facebook group, but you also find a link to some videos that will help you if you're in those early stages of trying to get your podcast off the ground, and help you figure out what 5 pitfalls are that new podcasters should avoid. And maybe you're a seasoned podcaster and you go, man, I hope I didn't make those mistakes. Or maybe you're making the mistakes and,
Right.
and want to get rid of those mistakes in your podcasting workflow. You might find it useful too. So those are all over at propodcastsolutions.com/ninja.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Darrell. Well, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd be remiss if we didn't bring up?
No, I think we've got it all covered.
Awesome. All right. Well, Darrell, thank you very much for your time and energy today and for sharing your story with us. Really appreciated this. And I think I'm going to be in touch with you in about 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. That sounds great, Tom. Thanks for having me.
All right. That was an awesome interview with Darrell. It's really cool to talk to people that, this all started out for a hobby for him. And It's because he and his wife love the show Lost, and I loved his introduction at the beginning of the show about that. But it shows he was doing this. He still had this corporate job, and then some turmoil happened there, and then he ended up leaving. And I think it was after 18 years. But he went through hiring a VA. His keeping his phone out of his bedroom, in his office. I loved his coffee pot social media timer thing that he's got going on. But overall, he just he just took a leap, and just happened to be one of the books that he talked about in the show. But other than that, great conversation, and I just love some of these small hacks that we can all implement, and it turns out to be a huge time saver for us personally, as well as just helping our relationships and make us more efficient. What were some of your key takeaways?
Thanks for listening to the UpRev Ninja podcast with your host, Tom Hudson. Navigate to our website at uprev.ninja today, where you will find additional resources to help you discover the best version of you. While you're there, join our newsletter and join the discussion on your favorite social media platforms. We've got some awesome guests lined up to share with us how they are becoming the best versions of themselves. Again, thank you for listening. Now it's time to go out and uprev your life.
If you haven't, please head on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review for the show. By doing so, this helps the show get noticed by more listeners and help spread the word of how to discover the best version of yourself. Also, if you have any feedback about the show or a guest that you would like, please go to my website, https://uprev.ninja and contact me. This week's review comes from Bernard Benny. Great mission and show! This show will definitely help inspire you and help you discover the greatness you are and can become. 5 stars.